When you're desperate to sell tickets and they're not moving as fast as you would like for them to be, it can make you do desperate things. Like openly acknowledge on your television show that your biggest show of the year somehow, their word, somehow, is still not sold out yet. That is what we saw on SmackDown on Friday night. SmackDown is the worst weekly wrestling show on television. This is no longer an isolated thing. These shows are getting progressively worse at a time when we are less than 2 weeks out from their biggest show of the year. Cody Rhodes against Randy Orton should be a slam dunk main event for WrestleMania. They have held off on a proper program between these two men for years. Randy Orton hasn't done much of anything for the past few years, if we're being honest. Cody Rhodes, he's had quite the adventure when it comes to the main event of WrestleMania. 3 years ago, he had his first one with Roman Reigns. That was in Hollywood, and he lost. He lost so that they could squeeze another year out of Roman Reigns and the Bloodline story. Not so much to give Cody another year to marinate as much as that. That was sort of the overarching reason. And that was very clear when The Rock came back and decided that he was finally ready to wrestle his cousin. So even though Cody Rhodes had won the Royal Rumble and they knew by that point that Rock and Roman was the direction they were going to go in for WrestleMania, they had Cody Rhodes go out on television and step aside and willingly give his WrestleMania match to The Rock, which blew up in their faces in spectacular fashion. Rock realized this, he saw the reaction, and he did the right thing. He said, you know what, we need to pivot. We heard that word a lot a couple of years ago, pivot. And pivot they did. We got Final Boss Rock out of the whole thing. And we got a night one tag team match that bled directly into night two. And then we got the Avengers Endgame finish of WrestleMania 40. It was great. One of the greatest WrestleMania endings of all time. That remains the peak of the Paul Levesque creative era. He has not been able to match that since. It has been a steady decline from there. So Cody saw his WrestleMania direction blown up and, meddled in by outside forces, but they were able to paint a picture that turned out even better than the original. So it all worked out in the end. Fast forward to WrestleMania 41. Again, outside forces conspire to shake up Cody's story at WrestleMania. Ari Emanuel gets on the phone, and we know this because The Rock has told us this already, although some of the stuff that Rock says you got to take with a grain of salt. But this is the story that he told. Got a phone call from Ari Emanuel saying, Dwayne, we need you. Tickets aren't selling fast enough for the Elimination Chamber. We need you, Rock. And we end up with this bizarre story of Rock wanting Cody's soul, which then leads to Triple H getting the bright idea to turn John Cena heel during his retirement run. Years after people actually wanted to see John Cena turn heel, they turn him heel, and they do so without any sort of long-term plan. They did it for a viral moment. And they got one. They got their viral moment that a lot of people were very excited about when it happened. And then we saw the follow-up and reality set in that maybe this wasn't the best idea after all. So Rock decides, you know what? I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. And we're left with Travis Scott taking an entire vacation week to make his way down to the ring in the middle of the WrestleMania main event. And Cody gets kicked in the dick. He loses in one of the worst WrestleMania main events of all time. So you would think that they would be extra sensitive to avoid making the same mistake the following year and screwing up Cody's WrestleMania story for this year. But here we are now. For the third year in a row, Cody's WrestleMania direction has been turned upside down. It's almost like someone is trying to sabotage this man on purpose. I'm not saying they are, but boy, it sure comes off that way. In just the last 3 months, we've had reports that WWE wanted to do a third match between Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania, possibly inside Hell in a Cell. But that fell apart. It fell apart because neither man wanted to lose to the other. Okay, that's my takeaway from all of that. I said it then and I still believe it now. So then it was Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre, possibly inside Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania. Only the problem is they had already wrestled multiple times. It was like beating a dead horse at that point. I'm glad we didn't get that. Although I'm starting to wonder. I'm starting to have second guesses now as we look at what happened this past week. So instead, they put the title back on Cody on SmackDown, and they had Randy Orton win the Elimination Chamber. And it's such a simple story to tell. The teacher against the student, the mentor and the mentee. Randy Orton vying for his 15th World Championship after a 6-year drought. That's all it needed to be. How you position them is less important. If you want it to be two baby faces, or if you want Orton to go heel and Cody to be the baby face, whatever. But the reality is, the fans don't want to boo Randy Orton. It's the same issue they had with John Cena last year. They did not want to boo that man, not in his final year. They didn't want to pay money, especially at these prices, to go see him one last time and have to boo him. And they wanted to see him break the record, which he did, in the worst way imaginable. Like, I look back at some of these layups that Triple H has been fed. John Cena's retirement year. You get to book out John Cena's retirement year. You get to book out a story for John Cena breaking the record and winning number 17. And you think to yourself, man, they can't possibly screw up number 17. And yet they found a way to fuck up a sure thing. Triple H doesn't drink. Okay, so instead of hold my beer, he said, hold my Poland Spring. And somehow he found a way to screw up what should have been a great story last year. It was a great angle a few weeks ago when Randy Orton bloodied up Cody and left him for dead. That was great. That was a great, serious, intense angle. They were on the right track. And then Randy Orton started chatting with someone on the phone. And we ended up with another mystery angle in a long line of them that Triple H has done recently. He loves his mystery angles. It was completely unnecessary, but it got people talking. That's why they did it. And look, when you get people talking, that's a good thing. It's a good thing provided that you can stick the landing. WWE is not very good at that. You do an angle like this and you let it linger for a few weeks, people get their hopes up. Their minds begin to race with all kinds of names as to who could be on the other end of the line. Is it Cowboy Bob? Is it Ric Flair? Is it Kevin Owens? Is it Stephanie McMahon? Is it Shane McMahon? Is it Vince McMahon? Is it Jim McMahon regaling Randy with tales of his great Super Bowl win with the Bears? I don't know. Why does Randy Orton need to be talking to anyone on the phone? He's already admitted why he did what he did to Cody. Nobody told him to do it. Cody Rhodes gave him permission the minute he told him, I want the best version of Randy Orton. I want the Viper. This is everything Randy just said in his promo on Friday. And it's like a switch got flipped. And so, he just went off on Cody. He didn't have anybody telling him what to do. He didn't need anybody else to tell him to attack Cody. He did that all on his own. But it turns out Pat McAfee was the voice on the other end of that phone. Pat McAfee showed up on SmackDown wearing a Randy Orton t-shirt. He kicked Cody Rhodes in the dick, just like John Cena did last year. And this went over about as well as you would expect. People didn't know what to make of this. Some people were pissed off. Some people were underwhelmed. Some people may have actually liked it. Right? I mean, some people also like it when a dominatrix pours hot wax on their genitals. Everyone has their weird kinks. I don't judge. Well, actually, I do judge, but I do it silently without them knowing. McAfee said, a month ago, he was asked about returning to WWE. And he said he felt the business had passed him by. He thought the current product was shit. Randy Orton called him up and said the business had gone in a direction that he didn't like. And then McAfee brought up the Attitude Era. Oh, the days of Stone Cold and The Rock. What happened to those days? Those fans had been forgotten. Today, he says, I have to watch two 5'5" guys do a 45-minute Iron Man match 10 weeks straight for no rhyme or reason, when you've got Randy Orton right there. He said WrestleMania tickets somehow are still available when you have Randy Orton right there. Yes, Pat, the same Randy Orton being advertised for one of those WrestleMania main events. Tickets are not selling great with Randy Orton in the main event. Great point. And he mentioned also that they are coming off recently their worst rated episode in SmackDown history with a puppet for a champion representing everything that those older fans hate. And he then revealed that he was the one who has been on the phone with Randy Orton. So if there was any wonder about, well, maybe he's not the guy. I mean, sure, you could leave open a 2% possibility that they're swerving us and we come to find out it was somebody else. I wouldn't be surprised they're looking at the reaction now and they're trying to come up with ways for it to be somebody else. Do I think that it is somebody else? No. And they had Pat McAfee come straight out and say, it was me. I was the voice on the other end of that phone, telling Randy Orton to kill everything. Not just for his 15th world title, but because the business Cody is leading is terrible, and Orton is going to save the fucking business, he says. They kept hammering that point home. We're here to save the business, which implies that the business is not doing as well as it used to be doing, which is a hell of a thing to admit on live TV, right? Because that worked so well when the McMahon stood in the ring back in 2018, and they admitted that Monday Night Raw was a steaming pile of dog shit. I'm paraphrasing. And then proceeded to blame it, not on themselves, of course, but on Baron Corbin. It's Baron Corbin's fault that this show is so terrible. They turned it into a storyline, how awful their television show was. And I don't recall there being much in the way of great change that followed that. In fact, I remember 2018 and 2019 being among the worst years in WWE history. The product was so bad. So to recap, they had Pat McAfee go out on TV and talk about how much the current product sucks, the talent sucks and they're too small, their champion is a corporate stooge, and their biggest event of the year is not sold out yet 2 weeks before the show. And this is somehow supposed to get more people to tune in and buy tickets to these shows. This was something ripped right out of a Russo-era Monday Nitro episode from the dying days of WCW, where they were constantly breaking the fourth wall and they were using insider terms and they were talking about scripts and all kinds of bullshit that nobody wanted to hear about. It did nothing to make the product better. And so now it appears that we are headed for a main event at WrestleMania with Pat McAfee in Randy Orton's corner, and quite possibly, because he wasn't on the show on Friday, but he's sure been part of the storyline, Jelly Roll in the corner of Cody Rhodes. That's based off Jelly getting dropped last week with that RKO. And it would not at all shock me to see a tag team match at some point, possibly a Backlash next month with Cody and Jelly against Orton and McAfee. But that would mean that Randy Orton would have to win the WWE title at WrestleMania, because Pat McAfee tweeted later on in the night that if Orton does not win at WrestleMania, he being McAfee, will never be seen or heard from again on wrestling television. Which kind of telegraphs the outcome, unless you honestly believe that Pat McAfee will never show his face again on a WWE show. I believe that about as much as I believe that Hangman Adam Page will never again challenge for the AEW World title. And so what was a main event that had a rich history between the two men involved to tap into will now instead be overshadowed by the involvement of Pat McAfee and possibly Jelly Roll. This is John Cena and Travis Scott all over again. They never learn. They are running the same city at the same stadium, with Cody Rhodes as the champion going into the show yet again, as he was last year, going into battle with the aging gunslinger looking for one more world title, as they did last year with John Cena. It's the same story and the same circumstances, right down to the celebrity being involved. They are doing the same shit all over again, but this year is worse. We have Pat McAfee. We have Jelly Roll over here. We have IShowSpeed on Mondays, likely in a match this year. We had Lil Yachty on SmackDown with Trick Williams. He'll likely be in his corner at WrestleMania. And we know they've been in active discussions to try to get Tom Brady to appear at WrestleMania. I said this the other night and I'll say it again. WWE has become fantasy camp for anyone with a big enough following for them to hitch their wagon to. Now, WrestleMania has always had celebrity involvement before. Okay, I'm trying to cut this off here before I get the inevitable, well, WrestleMania has always had celebrities. The first WrestleMania had tons of celebrities. Yes, I understand that. But never anything on this scale where they are so deeply involved in the week-to-week that is going on these shows. Nothing like this. It's all over the weekly television. And they think that by dressing the product up with all of these celebrities, it will sell more tickets because they can't rely on their own talent to do so. And it'll make the product feel hip and cool. You can dress the car up and make it look real nice if you want to. You can give it a new paint job. You could put a big red bow on it. but it's what's underneath the hood that matters. If the engine is shot, none of that other stuff matters. All you're doing is masking a much bigger problem. Admitting that the product sucks and telling people the Attitude Era was better, we need to go back to that. That is not going to suddenly make the product better. And for the fans that agree with him when he says all of that, and there are a lot of fans that would agree with that, all that's going to do is make them bigger baby faces, which is one of the reasons they're doing this. They think that by putting Pat McAfee with Randy Orton, it will help get Orton more heat and get Cody cheered at WrestleMania, at least a little bit more. We didn't see any evidence of that on Friday. And guess what? We're not going to see it at WrestleMania either. But the reason they are even doing this in the first place, they have had to construct this story with McAfee in the first place because apparently it came from above. So says Dave. Remember that? It came from above. So says Dave Meltzer and Mike Johnson and the fine folks at bodyslam.net. Meltzer was the first person I saw who even mentioned this. He tweeted during the show, it was an Ari call, meaning Ari Emanuel, the CEO of TKO. Body Slam is reporting that a source indicates that Ari Emanuel believes Pat McAfee is a star and will help elevate the program between Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes and get it to where it needs to be between his show on ESPN and the Smackdown episodes that are left before WrestleMania. And it says TKO are firm believers that mainstream names will help bring more eyes to the product and sell more tickets as they return to Las Vegas. Mike Johnson of PW Insider says, those we have spoken to believe that this was an edict from TKO brass to WWE creative, not a creative idea that originated in the writing room and was approved by Paul Levesque. One source believed that the edict may have come from as far up as Ari Emanuel, but we have not yet confirmed that. The idea seems to be that including McAfee in this scenario gives ESPN a new promotional dimension for WrestleMania, given McAfee's importance and popularity on their platform, giving the ESPN audience something additional leading into their first ever WrestleMania broadcast. And that would jive with what Fightful is saying, which is that this is all about corporate synergy. Two words you never want to hear about when it comes to creative. We're having corporate synergy now, influence creative decisions. That's never a good thing. But Johnson says the edict came down 3 weeks ago, but they were trying very hard to keep it quiet. The general belief among those we spoke with is that it was a bone for ESPN since Pat is a big part of their platform and WWE has WrestleMania on ESPN platforms this year. There's been rumblings that the alliance between the two sides has not exactly been the smoothest process. ESPN wanting subscriber numbers, while WWE hasn't seen ESPN get their streaming service available across all cable and satellite subscribers, as has been the plan, which I can verify because YouTube TV still does not have it. So anyway, he says this looks to have been a move to try and strengthen the alliance. It absolutely felt like they halted the momentum of the showdown between Randy and Cody. Yes, that's because the story is no longer about Randy and Cody. They have now introduced other elements into it that were not needed. But it's true. Super agent Ari Emanuel is also Pat McAfee's agent. McAfee hired him earlier this year to help him land TV and movie roles in Hollywood. That is according to Bloomberg. And that Ari Emanuel's goal is to transform the former NFL star into, quote, the next Sylvester Stallone. And to that end, Ari got McAfee a role on Tulsa King, which stars Sylvester Stallone. And it airs on Paramount Plus. He filmed a 4-episode arc for the 4th season, which I believe drops later this year. So the real reason that this is happening, if this is to be believed, is that Ari Emanuel is trying to get his client as much visibility as possible. And he wanted WWE to find a way to work him into the WrestleMania build and also try to move more tickets. Not because it helps the story. The story is secondary here, but because it helps Pat McAfee. Above and beyond anything else, it helps his client. And then beyond that, by including a big name, a celebrity name involved in all this, maybe they could sell a few more tickets, which they have struggled with doing. Those are the two big factors that are driving this right now. It has nothing to do with Cody Rhodes. It has nothing to do with Randy Orton. It has nothing to do with creating the best, most intriguing story possible between these two going into WrestleMania. Has nothing to do with that. And so if all of that is true and all of that is the case, there is a lot of shared responsibility to go around here. I cannot put all the blame on Triple H. If he's getting orders from his corporate overlords, then it's his job to carry out those orders. He's the head of creative. So it's up to him to figure out how to incorporate McAfee into the show, which is why he does not get a pass here. He still had to approve the actual idea or come up with the idea. I don't know that Ari Emanuel said, hey, you know what? Why don't you put Pat McAfee in the Cody and Randy match? It may have just been, hey, look, this is what we want to use Pat for. Find a way to get him on the show. And maybe WWE Creative took over from there, and they're the ones that came up with, okay, well, we'll try to work him into the Cody Rhodes and Randy Orton stuff, right? We don't know the minute nuts and bolts here just yet. You know, the chicken or the egg, which came first? We don't have all the details yet. But you cannot give Triple H, as the head of creative, a pass here. He is not just a victim in all of this. He's not some innocent victim. Even if this was essentially forced upon him, let's not pretend that everything else on these shows has been hunky-dory. And that is something that he has control over. When I sit here and I tell you that SmackDown is the worst wrestling show on television, and I don't watch NXT every single week the way that I used to, and I hear a lot of divided opinion about NXT. NXT is a very polarizing show from what I could tell. I have people telling me, man, you should watch it. It's the best show week to week. And then I have people on the other end of the spectrum saying, man, this show is fucking god-awful. I don't know what's going on. It's moving a million miles an hour. They throw shit at the wall. There's a lot of divided opinion about the show. Even if it's a bad show, though, it's not 3 hours long. When you have a bad 2-hour show, a bad 2-hour show will always be better than a bad 3-hour show. So taken together, when you really look at what we are getting every Friday with SmackDown, it is indeed the worst wrestling show of the week. And that's not Ari Emanuel's fault. That falls right at the doorstep of Paul Levesque because he is the head of creative. So when I say that, I'm not just talking about one thing. Now, Raw is better than SmackDown on most weeks, but the WWE product overall has been in a rut for some time now. Something like this might make it feel a little more chaotic and unpredictable, like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But if you're going to do that, it has to at least be good. It has to at least make sense. It has to at least be something that's going to actually benefit the product. You can't just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks when you're talking about your WrestleMania main event. You could do that on the undercard if you want to. You want to do that with fucking Danhausen and Kit Wilson. Be my guest. But we're talking about the WrestleMania main event here. Cody came back out later in the show in what Bodyslam.net says was an unplanned segment. He was told by creative, go out to the ring and shoot from the hip, regarding McAfee and TKO getting involved in this story. And PW Insider said the same thing, that there is a belief internally that some of Cody's comments were him shooting about the way that TKO inserted McAfee into the storyline. So Cody came out, he cut this fiery babyface promo that didn't really get much of a reaction, talking about how McAfee, as the man on the phone with Randy Orton, would be like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash revealing Disco Inferno as the third man in the NWO instead of Hulk Hogan. And I will never not laugh at Cody's desire to bury Disco Inferno any chance he gets. It's like a life mission for him. And he ended it by telling McAfee and, quote, everyone who represents him, inferring Ari Emanuel, to kiss his ass. Now, whether that was legitimate frustration boiling over or what they want you to think is legitimate frustration, who knows? It kind of sounds like they saw the reaction online was so vicious and they called an audible and said, hey, look, go out there. Let's send Cody out there to do some damage control and try to salvage things a little bit and make people who aren't happy feel a little bit better about things. This whole thing has turned into a mess. Now, I will admit, it gives me a lot of content to talk about. So there is that, right? But I would much rather have a coherent story that makes sense rather than something that feels like they're in panic mode right now because they were forced into doing something they didn't want to do. But hey, 30,000 plus on my SmackDown review and counting the other night. Thank you very much. But this is not the way. Some of these shows are genuinely unwatchable. Now, look, I can't sit here and tell you that when we look back at this a month from now, 2 months from now, we get to WrestleMania, we get to, just beyond WrestleMania, that they won't find a way to make it fun, that they won't find a way to make it work. I hope they can. I do. I sincerely do. I hope they can find a way to do that. For example, I wouldn't mind if at the end of all of this, they give Randy Orton his own little legacy type group. Maybe call up a couple of new faces from NXT to be by his side, his own evolution of sorts. I could do without Pat McAfee as the Paul Heyman or Don Callis of the group. I mean, McAfee is not needed. But if we end up with something like that, with Orton, maybe they show up at WrestleMania to help him win, right? That could work, right? Now, it sure wouldn't be Ricky Saints, not after the shit that McAfee said about 5'5" guys wrestling a bunch of Iron Man matches. But like Royce Keys, for example, debuting as Muscle to help Orton win the title. Ethan Page, or someone from NXT that we're not even thinking of who I've been impressed by, someone like Tavion Heights, right? I would love to see something like that. Take this shitty angle and turn it into something constructive instead of cutting promos on your television show that are destructive. It's not about going back to the Attitude Era. There was a lot to love about that period of time and a lot that has not aged well. It's about pushing the right people. It's about giving us compelling stories. It's about giving us great wrestling matches. You can't have one without the other, not when you have 3 hours of television every Friday night. This is still a wrestling show. I need action. I need action and I need story with characters I can actually care about and invest in, not jelly roll my eyes when I see them on my screen. TKO inserting themselves into the creative, it's never going to end well. Because their motivations are not the same as the creative teams. At the end of the day, it is about making money. That's the number one overarching goal of any business. But the creative team exists to try to construct stories that make sense. Stories that will, in the end, help make money and help create new stars. Their goals are not exactly the same as TKO's. TKO's goals are more short-term. Creative's goals should be long-term and looking at the bigger picture. My sympathy for Triple H only extends so far because he bears a lot of the responsibility for what we see on television every week. But if his hand is being forced on this, then I'm sure he's just as frustrated as anybody else, especially because he's the one taking it on the chin on social media. And if he can't produce the results that TKO is looking for, that will not bode well for his future as the chief content officer. And judging by the way TKO does business, if they ever did force Triple H out of that position, I have no confidence whatsoever that the person they pick to replace him would be any better, especially if it's someone from the outside. But they may not have to look to the outside. They may not have to stray very far from the wrestling bubble, given the big name who is currently sitting on their board, who's watching all of this play out and waiting very patiently. That's a story far more interesting than anything that we've seen on TV.